Good morning, Nashville. Before we get into today's episode, a quick but very important round of updates for you as this extreme weather continues. Hundreds of thousands of our neighbors are still without power due to this weekend storm, and a new transportation hotline is now live for anyone who needs help getting to a warming shelter. If you or someone you know needs a ride, call 615-401-1712. You'll be asked for your name, location, how many people need transportation, any mobility or special needs, and whether you have pets. Requests will be handled as resources allow, with priority given to those most vulnerable to the cold. That number again is 615-401-1712. Nashville Electric Service says power outages could last the remainder of the week, and Nashville Severe Weather has reported again that we're under an extreme cold warning through at least noon today. So please be careful if you're heading out, as branches and trees are still falling. Officials are continuing to encourage us to shelter in place. Many local businesses are still without power, but those who do have it are generally open with limited hours. So check social media before you go and tip generously. World Central Kitchen is providing warm meals at Germantown Kroger between 11 a.m. and 8 p.m. today, and the Fairground Shelter is also serving meals via the American Red Cross. We will add additional food relief resources to our Instagram at CityCast Nashville as they become available. Open Table Nashville also plans to resume their canvassing efforts tonight, and you can sign up to join them in helping our neighbors living outside by signing up at opentablenashville.com. There's no school today, and there's also no trash or recycling pickup, though Metro will reevaluate service for the rest of the week. Convenience centers are open with modified hours from 8 to 3:30. If you need storm-related crisis cleanup, call 211 or the Crisis Cleanup Hotline at 844-965-1386. Metro is suggesting all those with storm-related damage to take pictures to document everything. At yesterday's press conference, Fire Chief Swan said that we should plan for this as a long haul. Keep checking with your neighbors, share that number so folks can go get warm, and take care of each other. We'll be here with you every step of the way. And now, on with the show.
Today on CityCast Nashville, are the robots writing our music? I'm joined by Brittany McKenna, who recently published a deep dive in the Nashville scene on how songwriters are grappling with AI and what it means for creativity, jobs, and the future of Music City. From tools that promise faster workflows to virtual artists landing on the charts, the question isn't if AI will change Nashville, it's how much and who it helps or hurts. It's Tuesday, January 27th. I'm your producer, Daniel Sumstein, and this is what Nashville's talking about. I want to start with a really basic question. How are Nashville songwriters interacting with AI right now?
Well, one thing I learned quickly in reporting the story and kind of getting my ideas together is that a lot of people are still reluctant to talk about it. It's a bit opaque still, just in terms of who's using what and how often. But a sense I was able to get is that things like post-production, things like mixing are already more likely to be outsourced to an AI tool. As far as country music goes, it's not necessarily entirely new to the industry in the way that folks might think it is. While they haven't necessarily been using generative tools like Suno or some of these popular platforms we're seeing now, for years now, in country music, particularly for artists who record songs by outside songwriters, there has been a trend of songwriters pitching tracks to artists using a vocal emulator. So I'm going to use a deceased artist name just so that nobody gets weird. But let's say I was pitching a song to Waylon Jennings or something. Then I could put several of his existing tracks into this software. It will kind of come up with a composite of his voice, and I can put my song I wrote into it, have it fully re-recorded in his voice, send it to him, and, with the idea that that makes somebody more likely to want to cut your song because they can actually hear kind of what they would sound like. I think what's getting interesting with AI in Nashville right now is that it's not just behind the scenes practices like that anymore. We're starting to see AI-generated, quote, artists or kind of avatars land on charts. I think it's something that's being kind of forced from the shadows into the daylight, if that makes sense.
I think it's like a forbidden fruit type of situation where like no one wants to admit that they're using it. I have friends in the country world who are signed to publishers, and their experience working with top artists on the publishing company is that they are using it daily for their demos. So like, it's one of those things where people have personal opinions on it, but the genie is out of the bottle, and it's already becoming a part of people's workflows.
It's an interesting mix. I think people are both kind of defensive and curious at the same time. So it's an interesting inflection point right now.
What was the most surprising or concerning thing you discovered while reporting that story?
I think the biggest thing is probably just the speed at which all of this is moving. When I was making my very first outline for the piece to send over to Steve at the Banner, kind of brainstorming source ideas and, trying to take this huge topic and figure out a way to turn it into a 2,000 word digestible story. I was kind of trying to narrow down my focal points. And one of the first points I made to him was that I would not necessarily focus so much on the idea of AI generated artists, or I like to call them avatars. I'm not sure. I think the jury is maybe still out on what that term actually is. But, I told him I didn't think I would focus on that too much because even though, there have been a couple blips of success for these avatars, like there was that fake rock band, the Velvet Sundown, on Spotify over the summer who kind of found some viral success. I told him I was going to try to focus on what I thought were more imminent kind of threats or imminent changes. And then it was maybe 3 days after I sent him that email that all the news started to break about this, AI avatar artist breaking rust, landing on the Billboard country charts. And then I was like, oh, okay, well, looks like I was wrong on that one. It's just all moving so quickly that, it's like you wrap your head around one thing and then it's on to the next.
What are some of those spaces where you see this moving so quickly?
I think, things like post-production, which are, especially to like the average listener, kind of behind the scenes, inside baseball kind of stuff that your average consumer might not think of. I do wonder who is using AI for their lyrics, even if it's just kind of a final pass. I think that's something that people probably won't cop to until maybe this is more digestible or like kind of widely accepted. But I mean, I'm a writer. I'm not writing songs, but I'm writing, and I know that writing is hard, and it's certainly a temptation to know that these tools are out there. And I wonder if a songwriter is stuck on a lyric, there's one word they can't get. Are they turning to these tools? I don't know if we'll ever know the answer to that question. But, right now, I think people are kind of keeping their cards close to the vest in terms of what they're using and not.
Yeah, there's this, like way before AI, there's this website called rhymezone.com.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but it's like an ongoing joke in the songwriting community that they're like, yeah, I got the word from rhymezone.com, just because like you plug in any word and it shows you a rhyme. And so it's just funny thinking on that, like that was the original AI of songwriting in a way.
Yeah, it's interesting just to think about like, what tools are allowed and what tools aren't. There was a time when the thesaurus was new technology.
Totally.
And now nobody would think twice about flipping through it.
Well, speaking of new technology, something I thought was really interesting is you also chose to frame AI's rise as kind of a watershed moment similar to Napster or the drum machine. What made you decide that this wasn't just like an incremental shift, but something that fundamentally changes songwriting?
I think just, the speed with which it's being adopted, both in music, but just across the board. You think about how widespread Chat GPT is and, reading all these stories about students don't write their papers anymore. I feel like, that mindset is already kind of widespread.
Yeah, it's such a mixed bag of who's using what and who's agreeing to use it and who's refusing to use it.
Yeah, I think, when you get into those conversations, you're starting to talk about, ethics, essentially, what's right, what's not right, what should consumers expect of artists, what shouldn't they? It gets really complicated really quickly. To kind of frame it alongside the emergence of like Napster and file sharing services, or like the introduction of the drum machine. It's apples and oranges, like they're not the same, not going to have the same types of consequences or benefits necessarily, but like you were saying a moment ago, the genie's out of the bottle. These tools exist. People are really using them. I think people are only going to continue to use them more. And just like when the music industry had to figure out how to navigate the prevalence of file sharing platforms, they're going to have to figure out how to navigate AI, kind of whether they want to or not. And I think as with file sharing, it's going to take years to reach kind of a point of equilibrium, at which point the next obstacle is going to appear. But that's just kind of how it goes in this industry.
Yeah. Well, how do we think this is going to change kind of the ecosystem of the music industry here in Nashville? And should people be scared of losing their jobs?
Unfortunately, yeah. I think there are people who are going to lose work. I think, something that I was looking into that I wasn't able to actually fit into this particular story, but people who make music beds, for commercials or movie trailers, or just the kind of stuff that you don't necessarily think about, that feels like low-hanging fruit. It's okay if a human didn't make this because it's going to get played in an elevator. I think there's going to be more kind of delineation between like what's content and what's art. And anything that can be kind of under that content umbrella, whether that's accurate or not, kind of stands to be threatened by what's happening. I hope that labels and artists protect the people who help work to make their music, the people who are working in the studio, the players, the engineers. I think it's often going to be the artists and the label who kind of have the power to say, hey, I don't want an AI, I want a real human being to mix my track. I want a real human being to master this, or I'm not going to do this with you. And that not all artists have a lot of leverage. So then that puts a lot of the onus on the labels. I think, it'll be interesting to kind of see who stands firm for human-made music and who is more willing to kind of capitulate.
I know that we touched on this a little bit earlier and you tried to kind of not include this in your article, but I do want to touch on the song Walk My Walk by, as you described them, the Avatar group Breaking Rust. They topped the Billboard Country Digital Song Sales chart in late 2025, which was the first time an AI-generated song achieved this. But I know that a lot of folks felt like kind of duped, like they didn't realize that it was an AI artist. How can we as listeners do a better job of like identifying when a song was made via AI?
Yeah, that's a tricky one, because I think about kind of who, your average layperson listening to music. When I was doing these interviews, I used my mom as an example. She just kind of adopted using streaming services within the last year. So to ask someone like her or someone else who might not be keeping up with what's going on in music and technology to be able to distinguish between a human and an AI generated song when they've become so convincing, it's kind of a tall order. So I think that the industry would be wise to focus on consumer education, teaching people how to look up these artists. Do they have a website? Do they have representation of any kind? Like, do they have social media? That was one thing that I thought was really interesting about what the company Humanable, who are mentioned in the story, what they're doing. They basically created what is just like essentially like a human-made label, or in their case, kind of metadata that attaches to tracks, kind of in the same way when you go in the supermarket and you pick up an apple and it says certified organic. They're able to give musicians a certification to prove that, hey, this song, to the best of my knowledge, because, sometimes artists work with other collaborators who might be lying about their AI use. To the best of my knowledge, this song was created without the use of generative AI. That obviously is another step that artists have to take. It's another small thing they have to pay for. Once again, unfortunately, the burden is more often than not going to be on the artist or going to be on the label to make that distinction, because it's, for these AI companies, it really is probably beneficial to their bottom line for people not to know the difference.
Yeah.
So something that I kept hearing while doing these interviews, when asking artists, like, well, what can fans do? What can listeners do to support you and to kind of help you weather this new challenge, is interact with the artists you enjoy, pay for things, buy their records, go to their shows. AI-generated avatars can't perform shows. So if you see, if you find an artist who's popular and you can't find a single video of them performing live, that's probably a pretty good sign that you're not dealing with a human being.
When we take a look at the music industry right now, what are some steps that publishers and labels are taking to preserve the actual artists who make the music?
I do think that a publisher, let's say, could put kind of a policy in place for its roster of writers, like, hey, we don't do AI-generated song lyrics. Or a label can say, if you want to record a record for us, then the personnel have to be humans, or 75% of the people involved have to be actual human beings. I think the industry is going to have to kind of take a look at itself and decide, what do we want to be? Because I don't think that we're never going to have a shortage of artists. People are always going to want to create. People are always going to write and make music. It's very human. It's just it's part of who we are and what we do. And so it's going to be on the industry to continue to engage with that artistic spirit and continue to invest in real human artists who maybe they need a little work, maybe they need a little bit of mentorship, maybe they, need a little help in the studio or something, which costs money to hire a person to do. But the end result, I think, will be worth it. I do think down the road, when this is less of a novelty and less exciting feeling, just kind of to your average listener, I think that people are gonna really return to and want to protect human-made music. These next few years are going to be chaotic and strange and full of change. But gatekeepers, people in power, they really are in a position to decide, is Nashville going to stay the Nashville it's been, or are we going to kind of reject this really special, beautiful thing that's made our city what it is?
Yeah. And I think that could really benefit labels that choose to have that type of policy and hold those human ethics. Like, I could see a world in the next 5-10 years where it's like, if you're a label and you have artists on your roster and you are proud that none of them are using AI in their career, that's going to draw listeners to your label specifically.
Absolutely. I think it's kind of a similar mindset that you see when people want to support small businesses, going to the local bookstore instead of ordering things on Amazon. I think it's going to be kind of a similar mindset. Like, well, do I want to listen to music made by people, or do I want to listen to music that may have been 80% generated by an algorithm? Or like kind of what we've seen in film over the last couple decades. Like, there are people who really prioritize filmmakers who still try to use practical effects or build actual sets instead of using a green screen. And there's a time and a place for CGI. And I think just like that with music, there may be a time and a place for AI, but ultimately, like, music is a craft. And I think people who really love music really respect that and really want to support people who care about the craft.
Let's talk about some of the legislative efforts that are happening here in Tennessee. We recently passed the Elvis Act, which is the first U.S. law designed to protect musicians and performers from AI-driven voice cloning and deepfakes. Do you think that these type of efforts are sufficient to protect creative rights, or will new industry standards need to emerge?
I think it's a good start. You have to start somewhere. And the Elvis Act, if I understand it correctly, kind of at the core of it is kind of voice and likeness protection, extending. You can copyright a name, you can copyright a tagline, whatever. But, the Elvis Act is taking a step in the direction of protecting artists from having their work either stolen or kind of meddled with, and offering at least some clearer legal boundaries. I think there's still a long way to go in terms of establishing what constitutes stealing and what constitutes fair use. Because when the term fair use was devised, AI wasn't really a thing on anybody's radar. And so we have to go back and kind of revisit that and decide okay, well, what does that mean now in light of these new tools? As far as, federal policy, if I had to bet, I'm going to guess that they're not going to work very hard to to regulate much of this, because I think that just from what we've seen so far, I think that they're willing to give AI companies of all stripes, not just music, kind of free rein, which is a whole other Pandora's box of problems. So I think it will really be incumbent upon the industry to push these things forward. I don't know that we can expect it from the top.
Yeah, their track record with coming up with sensible policies for other issues is not great.
No, so I wouldn't bet on that.
Yeah. Well, this has been awesome, Brittany. I do want to close out on kind of just talking about what Nashville was built on, which is a city rooted in human storytelling. So looking at the future, what will be lost or gained if AI becomes a normalized part of the local music ecosystem?
Well, I think that that's still up in the air and we get to decide. I do think that there are scenarios when AI tools can be useful, helping somebody kind of shorten their workflow or not have to do busy work. But in terms of the actual creative work, the writing, the brainstorming, the ideating, it might be difficult now for people to distinguish between a human-made song and an AI-generated song. But I think about the kind of uncanny valley effect when looking at photos or watching videos of AI-generated people. They've gotten a lot more convincing just over the last couple of years. They all have the right number of fingers and toes now. But there's still something missing. And it's something that is difficult to articulate. And I think it's similar with music. I think that that human spark will feel missing to people. I just think that there's really something to the human experience and just the lived experience a person brings to writing a song that AI will never be able to replicate.
What do you think Johnny Cash would think of using AI?
Well, there's that famous picture of him with his middle finger up holding his guitar. And I feel like that might be your answer right there.
Thank you so much, Brittany. Listeners, go to your friends' shows, buy records, support human-made music. And this has just been such an enlightening conversation. And thank you again for writing such an awesome article on this.
Oh, well, it's really been great to talk to you. So thank you so much for having me on.
That's all for today here on CityCast Nashville. And don't forget, you can support the show and get great perks by becoming a CityCast Nashville neighbor at membership.citycast.fm. If you enjoyed the show, why not tell your friends, rate the show, leave us a review, and subscribe to our Hey Nashville newsletter. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Later.